Hello, everybody. We are today talking to Robyn Sheldon, and we've been guided to Robyn by one of the other speakers on this summit. And I was completely taken in from the very beginning. I went to her webpage by the very wonderful art that is on there. Just it spoke to my soul, and I knew instantly that we had to speak to her. And Robyn is, among other things, a midwife. She offers different pathways for soul exploration and deepens her own understanding of the numinous through art, writing, and ongoing soul seeking. And as a midwife, she assists babies to birth in sacred spaces so that they don't lose their connection to their soul wisdom. She also assists adults to rebirth the ancient knowing that connects them to one another and to the earth. So
and how wonderful is that?
How wonderful is that? So what is birthing? I can see that from that, it's not just restricted to the physical process of women giving birth to humans through their vessels. What is birthing to you, Robyn?
So I studied midwifery quite late in my life because I recognized that through the soul integration work that I do, that many people experience their primary trauma at birth, and that constricts them into a sense of being quite disconnected from their soul purpose, their life path, and so on. And so, of course, they still follow it, but they follow it from an unconscious place rather than a more conscious place. So then I wanted to assist people to give birth to these babies so that they could remain connected to their soul wisdom without being disconnected at birth. And so birth to me is all about birthing a new I just said a new form of consciousness, but actually I mean a birthing of an expanded form of consciousness that of course has always been here and is always deeply embedded in who every single one of us is, and that we can do that at any juncture in our lives, and that I have specifically at times worked with people at birth because the veils between the different levels of consciousness are so thin at birth and death, in those transition phases of coming in and leaving the body. So I used to also work as a hospice volunteer, and it was very obvious to me that there's something incredibly sacred that happens at the point of coming in and the point of leaving the body, that filled some kind of a heart yearning in me to work in those spaces. But actually, these days we get to work in them all the time because we've moved so out of any kind of place of complacency, like we're and then the only way out of it is through, and the only way through is to kind of step into this vast, mysterious unknown that is utterly frightening and absolutely magnificent. And as you were saying, Monia, is this kind of sense of this wisdom kind of coming down and anchoring into this physical experience of being here.
Okay, that I just had a realization from that. That's fantastic. So when you are helping adults birth that knowledge and birth themselves, how do you go about doing that?
May I ask what the realization was so that I can answer according to that?
The realization was that you're talking about the traumas at birth, and I have been taken back to at one point to a traumatic experience being stuck in the birth canal of my mother, and from that I have had a long and deep-seated claustrophobia of not being able to move, and this so. The movement we're speaking about of the wisdom, the over beings of ourselves coming through, that cannot come through as long as we have the traumas in place because those traumas, they create hard places within ourselves that nothing can move through until they have been dissolved. And that's one of my big theses, is like we all have so much trauma, so much more trauma, both from our own lives, but from the previous generations, like whether you want to call it genetic or whatever you want to call it, but we have a lot of deep-seated trauma. It needs to be dissolved for this world to be changed into what we want it to be changed into and needed to. And it's all going to happen in due time. You, I, Katrine, and all the other speakers are helping this process of birthing. But we all have these hard places, and we cannot see them ourselves because they're suppressed in the subconsciousness, and we need to bring them to the surface. They need to be dissolved for this wisdom to come through. And I just had the realization that that's one of the functions of the trauma, is stopping us from lifting all this. So that was
wonderful. Thank you. Thanks for explaining. And in fact, one of the functions of the trauma as well is to bring it into our awareness. So as you say, it's very subconscious, these constrictions. But the re-experiencing of the trauma, which we do through creating negative patterns of experience in our lives, that play out that particular theme that we are sitting with as a constriction in the subconscious, those replaying patterns is an attempt of the soul self to actually bring those up into conscious awareness in order for us to release them. And then when you were, because when I was doing this, I wasn't specifically thinking about birth, but in fact, I was thinking about what our role is these days in healing something of the global collective trauma that we're in, and that there's a necessity to bring the sacred feminine down into a connection with the earth. And by sacred feminine, I just mean the energy that moves earthwards rather than the energy that moves heavenwards, which is more yang. So that's a yang movement. So this is a yin movement. But when you were saying that about this sense of moving downwards, something I'm very aware of is that at the point of birth, so what seems to happen is that babies' feet, when they're in fetal form, so when they're still fetuses, when they're in utero, they're not constrained to the physical experience of being embodied. So they still experience the world from a larger soul sense of themselves, and they're not yet completely kind of, even if they've experienced trauma in the womb, they can still be beyond the physical body. And then at the point of birth, there's this necessity to actually come and land and embody fully. And often I think the physical body might already hold some kind of trauma from womb experiences that have not been worked through and so on. So they land in that. And then also, as you say, you know, the actual birth experience itself can hold a certain amount of challenging experiences that are resisted and create maybe something like claustrophobia and so on. And I think what happens on a soul level, and this is what fascinates me and what I really love to work with, is this idea that when we take that movement into embodiment at the moment of birth, it's very often arrested. And it's arrested because we're not seen and not held and not recognized for the immense wisdom and soul beauty and preciousness that we're bringing in. And so very often what happens at birth is that there's this flurry of activity of making sure the baby's breathing and cutting the umbilical cord and doing stuff. And that's
why?
Whatever. But there's very little conscious awareness of how precious that moment is. And that in itself arrests the the experience of dropping into the body. And so I have a very, very lovely example of this, is that I went to a birth where when I first moved to South Africa, I was waiting for my foreign registration to come through as a midwife. So I was assisting the other midwives at their home births and so on. And I went to a birth where the mother, I'd not met the mother before, and the mother had requested that we didn't interfere with the baby or touch it unnecessarily when it was born. So she was exhausted. And as she gave birth, she kind of went, oh, kind of like dogs do after they give birth to puppies. You know, they kind of ignore the puppy in the amniotic sac, and you kind of going, why don't you, puppy can't breathe, forgetting that the puppy's breathing through the umbilical cord and so on. And the dog goes like this. So she goes like this. And this baby is lying on a little towel on the floor. And the midwife, bless her, took a little piece of cotton wool and just wiped the mouth of the baby just to ensure that there was no kind of amniotic fluid in the way of it beginning to breathe and so on. And then it didn't start breathing immediately because, of course, it's breathing through the umbilical cord still. It's receiving oxygen through the umbilical cord. And so if a baby is not breathing, as the birth attendants, it's impossible to breathe yourself either, because you're just waiting for this moment of breathing. And the baby was fine. Its color was fine. It had tone. You know, these are the things that you look for, but it just wasn't, it had a heartbeat, just no breathing. So it's just lying there like this. And we kind of like looking at one another, waiting. Like that. And it must have been, I don't know, 45 seconds. It was the longest 45 seconds. It was very, very long, whatever it was. I can't, you know, it's a timeless kind of memory.
Yeah.
And then he started breathing, and then the mother kind of came back and she picked the baby up and she just started touching it very, very tentatively, and then put him here and so on. And what was extraordinary to me is that I then didn't see the baby again until 6 months later, because I was just the assistant. You know, she wasn't my client. And she came to a postnatal clinic-y get-together thing that I was hosting, and brought the 6-month-old child along. And he was the most embodied being that I had met. I mean, other than maybe enlightened masters or something, he was fully in his body down to his very toes. And he sat like this, like this Buddha, and he just engaged with everybody. And it was just like, wow, that's actually the potential that we have to stay connected to that larger sense of self. Was an extraordinarily insightful kind of thing for me.
Yeah.
That sounds wonderful.
Yeah, because it seems that we have been using all our time as humans to interfere with nature, to make sure that nature didn't make a mistake, and to desperately try to avoid trauma because we don't want to feel uncomfortable. It's kind of illegal to get very ill or to die, and it's illegal for children to die, you know, it's like totally verboten. So, and just let nature do its thing. How to dare to do that? Yeah, it's very challenging for us, because we've been taught that nature is full of mistakes and we need to be there and correct them
because
in time.
We are so clever. We think for some odd reason we think we're cleverer than nature.
We're separated from nature. We're not nature. Nature is something out there, and we need to correct it. and handle it. And I see a big wave of midwives actually, and women taking the birth back and making it just calm and natural, to make sure that the baby lands safely, instead of all that picking it up and slapping it on the bum and
cutting the umbilical cord as soon as the baby is out, and all these.
Yeah.
Which is very shocking as well. But you know what I'm aware of as you're talking, Katrine, is how that process of moving into embodiment that we were robbed of at birth is the process that we are given the opportunity to move into as adults these days because of the chaos that's happening in the world. Something of, we're kind of going through another birth trauma right now. And I know that for myself, there's this sense of this kind of incredible importance, which you talk about as the separation between nature and ourselves. So this kind of sense of living as separate beings, recognizing the interconnection, recognizing that within and beyond, and as a subtler kind of sense of that interconnection is this recognition that actually everything is one underneath it all, but that there's a meeting point between this oneness that we're bringing down into this physical form and the separate sense of self living in the world. That, you know, I'm sure you've heard that thing about we take form in order for God to experience itself, that kind of and that the meeting point of those two is something that happens in the heart, so that the upper body is connected to the sense of maybe yearning for something beyond this earthly thing, and the lower body is connected to the earthly wisdom and so on. But actually, when we bring them together, the feeling of the point of connection is a feeling of love, and that birthing of the connection between the two in the heart space, for me, is the same as the thing that we were disconnected from when we were born.
Okay.
Perhaps I didn't explain very clearly.
I think you did.
Yeah.
I think I just have to hear it for myself again, but something landed in that. Yes. Yeah. It sounds right.
Yeah.
Sounds right. Yeah.
Maybe just one simple way to say it is that we lost our connection to our soul selves on the whole. Almost universally, we do that at birth, unless we're birthing in a way that really acknowledges the sacred imprint of birth. And that what we're needing in the world now in order to come to a place of healing, because we need to heal from a place of a higher level of consciousness, is the reconnection to that soul essence within the physical form. So it's not kind of reconnecting to soul up there or something completely expanded, but it's the sense of doing it within our physical bodies. So that's what the babies are trying to do at birth, but they don't get a chance to. And what we're being given the chance to do now, and yet to do it is quite overwhelming. You know, it's quite difficult to live as from an expanded place of consciousness in the chaos and the personal chaos, the chaos I create in my own life, from being on the computer too much and whatever, all that sort of, and our mind's so busy and so much information and so much emotional kind of challenges all the time and so on. And within that, actually to expand into that, it's like, it's so difficult at birth, for instance, to expand into the extraordinarily powerful process of labor, to not resist it, to expand into it. And that's what we're being called to do now, is to expand into the chaos in a way that we go, yes, this too. And then we can land it here.
But it's a twofold process, because there's the expansion of the consciousness, but there's also a turning inwards to our own sense of self and sovereignty and knowingness that is within instead of without. So you have a flipping of the compass, or a flipping of the poles, where we have been out here with like, tell me the right answer and I will comply, to I know the right answer in here. And then at the same time you have the expansion of the breath of the consciousness that also enables that I am here.
Absolutely. So the movement is a movement. It's like a torus.
Yeah, I was about to say that. Yeah, it's like,
there you go.
Yeah.
So you move like this inwards. You have to go inwards first in order to be able to actually move into that expanded kind of sense. But always, that I love that saying by T.S. Eliot, except for the point, the still point, there would be no dance, and there's only the dance. To move inwards into that still point, but that still point is everything. It's so vast and expanded, and yet within the still point is the myriad 10,000 things of existence, and so on and so on. It's like,
yeah.
Hey, thanks for watching. If you liked what you just saw, head on over to whoselifeisitsummit.com/podcast, where you can find full-length episodes as well as in audio format, and we do a lot of other cool stuff. You can hang out with us and other like-minded individuals who want to create a world that works for everyone, and we do that on our platform, where we can chat, and we have Q&As and exclusive interviews as well. So there's so much to get over there. So come on over and play with us.